Welcome to the Woman's Connection. I'm Barry Louise Switson, your moderator. The Woman's Connection is a program about events shaping women's lives and helping one gain authentic power on a personal or professional level. So won't you stay tuned? Welcome to my show, The Woman's Connection. I'm Barry Louise Switson. The Woman's Connection is a program about women who've had challenges and obstacles in their lives. But more important, it's what they've done about it. What would you do if you were kidnapped, tricked, or forced into gross violation of your basic human rights? We are going to learn what ended 50 years ago and still hasn't been resolved, and just recently has been recognized as a violation. I would like to welcome Mrs. Dong Woo Lee Hom, President of the Washington Coalition for Comfort Women and a Man, Professor Chris Simpson, Professor of Communications at the American University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I would like to show a clip about Comfort Women. This is something that I just learned about. For reasons you will understand, I do not have a Comfort Woman guest on the show today. So let us roll in the clip.
In 1900s, when the Japanese imperial power was spreading all over Asia, to cope with the problems of their soldiers raping women, the Japanese government set up a system of military brothels known as comfort stations and provided sexual services to their soldiers on the battlefields. From Korea, the Philippines, China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Burma, hundreds, thousands of young girls and women were tricked with a false promise of jobs abroad, or in many cases abducted, and then were imprisoned as sex slaves of the Japanese soldiers. One such young girl was Kim Sang-hee from Miryang, South Korea. She was just 15 years old. One day, she was walking home with a friend from a photo studio. All of a sudden, someone grabbed her from behind. She was then pushed into an army truck on top of other girls and driven to Daegu train station. There, she saw another 100 girls. They traveled all night on the train, crossed the border, and arrived at Dairang, China. From there, they were taken to Shanghai by a cargo ship. They were transported like cargo to Japanese military camps all over Asia. Life in the comfort stations was hell for these young women. Soldiers queued up in front of the tiny cubicles where the women were kept like prisoners. Day and night, they were raped every half hour, 30 to 40 times a day. There were documents on the rates for sex services and even special discount coupons. Their quarters were heavily guarded, and it was impossible for them to escape. Often, they were also beaten and tortured. Kim Sang-hee was raped the first time. She wished she was dead. So she went to the bathroom and drank a bottle of disinfectant to kill herself, but ended up in the clinic bleeding. On the cargo ship to Singapore, she again wanted to kill herself. But she was kept at the bottom of the ship and was not allowed to come up to the deck except for some air. During 10 years as a comfort woman, she contracted all kinds of diseases and had to be treated from clinic to clinic for a total of several years.
상관한테 이제 얘기를 했는가 봐. 해나는 이제 그 죽을 담았을 거 이제 막 욕 묘을 갔구나.
Though the Allied forces carried out an extensive investigation of the comfort stations immediately after the war, nobody talked about the comfort women. They were completely forgotten.
You know, trying to edit this tape was very difficult and very emotional for me because it's like, it's really sad. While the tape explains what comfort women are, how did the term originate?
It came from a Chinese character saying that offering your body or contribution of your body.
Oh, really?
That's how it came from. It is called in Korean 정신대.
Very interesting. Thank you for explaining it, because everybody would say, what is a comfort woman? And I'd have to explain it. Now I know the origin. What I don't understand is that this has been going on since the early 1900s. Didn't the government do anything, or couldn't they do anything, or let people know to be aware of something like this is going on?
You're talking about the Korean government now?
Yes.
Well, Japan colonized Korea beginning around 1900, and was really quite brutal as far as stealing resources and so forth from the Koreans. But one thing that they did is that they created groups that ran Korea under their auspices, so that the same military administration that was responsible for kidnapping these women or tricking them and bringing them into these brothels had its own agents in the Korean government. And so this was part of the reason why they were successful in carrying this out.
Would people get rewards for kidnapping people, women?
Oh, no way.
No.
No way. Japanese government has never admitted for legal responsibility. They kept evading their responsibility up to now.
Yes, Dong was referring to the women have never received rewards from this. But as far as dragging them into the brothels, the Japanese military would actually pay bounties to their political police or to collaborators from the various countries that they had occupied to bring women into these brothels.
That's so sad. Now let me ask you one question. How did both of you get involved in this?
In November 92, I belonged to Korean United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C., and I was the president of Women's Methodist. We did invite a former comfort woman named Hwang Gung-ju, and we heard about her stories, experiences. That's how we all became learned about the sad story in the past. And at the same time, I was reminded of my own younghood. I had an aunt who was about 5-6 years older than I am, and I was in my 10 or 11, and I remember one day my grandmother was going to send her away, getting married to a strange man, and my grandfather mentioned, "Don't you think she's a bit too young?" Then my grandmother was so upset and furious, saying that, "Do you want to see your own daughter being kidnapped for 정신대?" Means comfort woman. But I did not realize what it meant then. However, at the time of this November 92, I was reminded of that story, and that's how I became involved.
So people knew about it, and they would only take single women
Yes.
or young women.
Aging 14, 15, 16, normally, but teenagers.
Wow. Chris, how did you become involved in this?
I had spent some years studying the Holocaust and done some writing about that, and had heard about the Comfort Women's story, but didn't know how to learn more about it. And Dongwoo had organized a meeting, a lecture in Washington with a Korean scholar who was very impressive and well-spoken. And there was an advertisement of this meeting, so I went to the meeting, and it was very interesting, quite well done, and so we started talking.
Are you writing a paper or a book on this, or?
No, I don't think so. What we do is we have different literature and pamphlets, and well, for example, the United Nations is right now considering resolutions that would protest what the Japanese have done to the Comfort Women and their refusal to make a clear apology or to pay redress to the women. So there's a lot of writing involved in that, and we try to put pressure on the United Nations so that they will actually come through and do this. And that takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of time, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what was the catalyst? It took somebody to 40 years or 50 years to come forward and express what's been going on.
I remember the first comfort woman was Pe Bong-gi in 1981. She was residing in Okinawa, and she was in her late 70s then, early 70s. And she felt so frustrated, and she wanted to let the history know about this fact before she dies. And she was so courageously stepping forward
I would say
and
so.
testimony. That's inspired many other former comfort women for stepping forward, talk about their stories.
I got goosebumps. Oh, that's fabulous. Was she afraid to come forward even at that point in time because of what her family might think?
She did not have families. Many of these women were neglected, were abandoned. They were totally overlooked by families, and they have been living just by themselves.
So
Misery.
how did they survive all these years?
It's misery,
Misery.
life of misery.
I think
So sad.
what's happened with the women coming forward is really a very interesting and powerful illustration of the power of older women, right? 60, 70 years
Right.
old and so on, which usually gets overlooked. But you get to be that age, you've had it about up to here with how people treat you, and so some people step forward and become quite outspoken about their lives. Now, many of the women who were forced into this came from very poor backgrounds, came from farm regions in Korea and so forth, or from other countries. So they had few skills. And after the war, very difficult life, emotional scars, physical damage to their bodies, some ended up with very serious diseases. And mostly they lived from hand to mouth in doing whatever jobs they could in order to survive.
Most of them lived in poverty. When I visited late 1994, I had interviewed 15 former comfort women, and I had visited every single of them, and it was just very difficult for me to observe.
I can imagine. Now, how did you find these women? Word of mouth went around, or that they would finally come forward?
Well, in Seoul, Korea, there is Korea Council for who takes care of these women, and who has started making awareness and urging Japanese government's redress. And they have all the records of these women. And some of these women do not wish to be identified or to be addressed, but some of them was so courageously talking about their experiences.
Are there many comfort women in the United States, or you don't know?
So far, we know there is one living in New Jersey area. However, she's not ready to step forward. She does not want to be identified, her name, her identity. But we do know that she was a comfort woman. And I believe there would be some more in the United States view of large population of Korean in the community. However, we haven't been able to find more.
How do you get the word out? Through various Korean organizations, or you just come on my show?
Yes, yes.
I hope so. I
Need
would
your
like
help,
that.
yes.
I would really like that.
This is not simply a Korean issue, and it is true that the Korean community in the United States is very much interested in this for obvious reasons. Koreans were the main target of this particular kind of persecution. But it's much broader than that, and wherever the Japanese government occupied militarily during the war, they would create this system of so-called comfort stations. So Philippines, Burma, all through Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Yes, yes. Something like 200,000 women were forced into these brothels in the course of the war.
It's a large number.
It is a large number. It was a whole system of handling what the Japanese perceived to be their soldiers' sexual needs. So there was they had their own money system, for example, by which these soldiers would be given money in order to if they had passes to go to the brothels and so on. The women would be handed out as rewards for military activities, that sort of thing.
So it is known 80% of these women were Koreans. There were some Dutch women. One of the former Dutch women is still alive, and she did witness and she did testimony. And there are some Filipino former comfort women, Chinese, Taiwanese, North Koreans, many in Asian countries.
Have all of them, well, I can't say all of them, but have many of them come forward from the other countries, or is it primarily the Korean women who've come forward?
As I mentioned, it is estimated 80% of a couple 100,000 women were Koreans because Korea was under Japanese colony. However, there were many other Asian victims also. And yes, there were quite a few in Philippines at the moment, and some in Malaysia, you name it.
Now, I understand a lot of these women committed suicide.
That's the figure nobody is really sure about, because many must have taken their lives by themselves at the end of World War II.
Is this because, A, they were ashamed of what happened to them, they were afraid their family wouldn't accept them back, or just the whole circumstances?
Those souls are not with us. Those souls are gone, and it's very hard to verify. However, it is estimated that, yes, due to so many mental, physical difficulties, they must have taken their lives away.
It is true that some committed suicide, others died young from disease or just
killed.
the horrible experience. But what was much more common is that as the Japanese troops retreated back towards Japan, they would murder the women. Simply because they would take the women would take up too much room on the troop ships, they just simply weren't needed anymore, or the retreat was very rapid, and so on. So in a number of places in Southeast Asia, both in 1945 and since then, scientists have discovered mass graves of comfort women who were murdered as the troops retreated. So there are a number of different important issues here. One is the literal treatment of the individual women by the Japanese troops, which was criminal. Another aspect of this is the whole very complicated issue of the relationship between men and women generally. Another aspect of this is the whole complicated issue of colonialism, imperialism, whatever you want to call it, but the process by which some countries take over other countries. And then finally, for me, a important issue is the way in which the perpetrators, in this case, the ones who committed the crimes, have succeeded in lying about it, covering it up, evading responsibility for it, and so on.
Are they doing that because they're ashamed of it, or they just don't, they sweep a lot of things under the carpet and don't want to talk about things in general?
The Japanese government has not admitted until early 1994, just 2 or 3 years ago. They kept evading their involvement even. They kept saying that they did not know anything about this existence.
Even with all this record documentation
So
you've
whenever
got?
there is one proof just coming out, then they just slowly admitting one by the other. And up to now, last week we had a resolution adopted by UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva that this was a violation of women during wartime, as brief Chris mentioned earlier. And UN Human Rights Commission had appointed a special rapporteur named Kumara Swamy. She's an attorney, and she has done lots of research, interviews, and studies, and she has come up with a report of 37 pages. And she has submitted that for Human Rights 52nd session. And finally, after several weeks of discussions and reviews and analysis, UN Human Rights Commission had adopted her report as they had taken as note, and they had welcomed her work, and they have recommended for next 53rd session to take this issue as a primary agenda for the next 53rd session at Human Rights Commission.
That's a great accomplishment.
Very hard work. You know, one thing that viewers might be able to relate this to, as far as the way in which the denial took place, it would be as though the German government had never admitted that there was a Holocaust. It would be as though, you know, back during the Holocaust, there were a variety of stories that the Germans told about, well, we were relocating these people, or even in some cases that we were benefiting the older Jews by putting them in a special camp for older Jews, and so forth and so on, all these kind of stories. Well, what's happened to the comfort women is as though that type of lie had not been challenged. When the first comfort women came forward, what the government said, and this is very senior cabinet level, spokesman for the government, said, oh, these women are just prostitutes.
Oh, how nice.
Yes, exactly. So not only did they trick them, keep them in brothels, have them raped repeatedly for years, then when they had the guts to come forward, they said, oh, they're just prostitutes. On top of all this.
What an insult. Insult upon insult.
Exactly.
According to this Comfort Woman's testimonial, a book, this contains 19 former Comfort Women's stories. And as Chris mentioned earlier, his words are fully supported by the stories written by these women. And their lives were totally unbelievable. You know, they were tortured, they were so harshly treated by Japanese army during the war.
I understand reading it. It was so sad.
Despite all of these facts and the stories and witnesses, still
They don't make
no
noise.
resolution has been reached yet, until last week.
What we've succeeded so far in doing, and by we, I don't mean our little organization, I mean people all over the world really have been working on this, is to force the Japanese to acknowledge that it took place.
That's
right?
going to take a lot of work.
No, that we succeeded at so
Okay.
far. We were able to force the Prime Minister to acknowledge that the Japanese government, in some sort of vague way, had responsibility for this, that it was somehow linked to their military. That's how far we've gotten. But what they refuse to do now is to acknowledge that this was actually a system, right? that it was actually organized and that somebody was responsible for it. And this is what they are lobbying very hard to avoid acknowledging.
Let me ask you this. What can the audience do to help you?
We want all your assistance and continuous help in making this issue to be publicly known to the whole international community, and we get this problem resolved properly, justly, so that we should regain justice and honor lost by this woman, so that we can all squarely take care of this issue in human history.
Now, if somebody wanted to contact you, how could they contact you?
We are located in Washington, D.C., and you can either contact me by telephone or writing me, and if you want to know the address, is that what you're asking
Yes.
for? Our telephone number is 703-356-5151, or we have fax number 703-356-1525. Thank you.
Chris, you wanted to say something? We're about to close.
Yeah, you know something that really simple that people can do that does make a lot of difference?
Yes.
Talk about it.
Ah.
Talk about it. Ask people that you meet about it. If you know somebody in the media, talk to that person. If you know somebody in politics, ask them. And get the word out. Start chatting, even. That makes much more difference than most people realize. And so if your viewers will bring this up, then I think that will do a lot of good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. Thank you for joining us today. What would you do if your basic human rights were violated? Thank you for joining us. I would like to hear from you. It's because of people like you that keep people like me on the air. Please write Mary Louise Switson, The Woman's Connection, Ansonia Station, Post Office Box 918, New York, New York 10023.